welcome back to part 3 of What Even Happens in Metal Gear Solid 3. For this episode, after completing my typical synopsis and analysis, I'll be mixing things up somewhat to provide, once and for all, my theory of what's going on behind the scenes. So let's begin. After narrowly surviving a naked escape from the very base you've worked so hard to sneak into, Groznyj, Snake, briefly glimpsing the River of the Dead in a surreal and phantasmic interlude, regroups with Eva's help before returning to Groznyj for one last showdown with Volgin and the Shagohod. Using instructions provided to him by Sokolov shortly before the scientist was killed, together with Eva, Snake destroys the Shagohod and stops Volgin, before finally facing his former mentor and finishing his mission. But then comes a double betrayal. Eva, actually an agent of the Chinese government, attempts to steal the secret document you were along the mission assigned to get, and leaves you with a cold and lonely debriefing on what the boss was really up to. And it wasn't defecting. Now awarded the title Big Boss, Snake, deeply traumatized and disillusioned, can do nothing but pay his respects at the boss's unmarked grave, left anonymous due to the disrepute her cover story has caused. Well, with the synopsis out of the way, let's get into what really happened in MGS3. Snake's been strung up for interrogation, a black plastic bag draped over his head. One very subtle detail in this scene is that at the start of it, we are actually hearing Volgin torturing Sokolov, and torturing him, it sounds, to death. This would be retconned in the non-Kojima Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, but that's who Volgin's actually in the middle of interrogating when we wake up. Demonstrating his extreme sadism, Volgin continues to beat on Sokolov's corpse before letting it crumple to the ground. You can even hear it get audibly dragged out of the room.
I guess he's dead.
Once he starts torturing Snake, Volgin inadvertently causes a transmitter to fall off of your body, which the boss immediately takes credit for. This is how she's known your location all along. Evidently, she planted it on you during CQC at the start of the mission. When Volgin asks the boss about it, she says unconvincingly that she planted it on you so that the Cobras could ambush you. He points out that if that were so, why did the Cobras still all wind up dead? Volgin's words here about the Cobras reinforce the idea that they've been meant to let Snake kill them. Just as he's suspecting here, they knew where he was, yet every single time their ambushes failed as they were meant to.
It's part of their legend.
Legend?
The legend of the Cobra unit. I'll let Sigint explain. Sigint?
Yeah, that's a microbomb.
A microbomb?
Yep. During World War II, the Cobra unit was used for the nastiest kinds of wet works, the kind that could never be let out into the open. Their missions were so top secret that not only were they forbidden to be taken prisoner, they couldn't even leave their corpse behind. Because of this, or so the legend goes, they carried a microbomb with them on their missions in case they needed to commit suicide. I always thought it was just a rumor. I never expected it would turn out to be true. But why would they be carrying bombs this time around? It's not like they're in hostile territory.
Maybe they're ready to die.
Ready to die?
Yeah. They've got no unit to go back to. Not even a country.
So they've got no place to die except the battlefield, huh?
As I said last time, each Cobra's speech is more about giving Snake a taste of their own specific emotion that they bring into battle than about how they're going to kill him. It's almost like one big training op, or more like a final exam before Snake's graduation. Volgin then asks for that magic word in MGS3, proof. He wants proof the boss wasn't secretly helping Snake along, sacrificing her own men just to weaken Volgin, spying for the enemy. Notice that Volgin throws the transmitter away, but behind him, Ocelot catches it. Volgin tells the boss to take Snake's eyes to prove that she wants revenge for him having killed the Cobras.
Ruin him, just as he did the Cobras.
But what's kind of funny about the relationship between these two characters is Volgin's clearly intimidated by the boss, as we saw not only here but in the last scene when the boss used CQC to stop Volgin from shooting Snake. To call this a low point for Snake's mission is an understatement. But notice that ultimately, rescuing Sokolov didn't matter in the end. In this regard, maybe it was somewhat of a sham objective to pull the wool over Snake's eyes about his real primary purpose, which is to recover the legacy.
Your real target is the Philosopher's legacy, isn't it?
All Sokolov was good for was providing Eva with the Shagohod's launch data and telling you the best way to destroy it, which is blowing up its reserves of jet fuel using C3. Presumably Eva learned this as well, and before you did. She stole the C3 apparently on the way to meeting you in the mountains and stashing your stolen getaway vehicle, the Wig, but more on that later. This brings up a key question though. We know why the boss was tracking Snake, but why was Eva apparently tracking Granin?
Look at this.
A transmitter?
Exactly.
You say Granin's shoes were rigged with a transmitter? That sounds like something the KGB's been working on lately. It's exactly like you described, a miniature transmitter that's small enough to put in a shoe.
Granin said he got the shoes from a woman called Tatiana. You think she's a KGB spy?
Could be. Or maybe it's some kind of ploy to throw suspicion on her. Anyway, it's your job to find out.
Well, it's implied that Eva already established Granin as an asset before you meet him at his lab. Presumably the transmitter was so Eva could know the best times and locations to visit him. But apart from this practical use, the transmitter also helps cover her true identity, because it's KGB technology. This gives the Chinese plausible deniability, hides Eva's true objective of obtaining the Philosopher's legacy by making it seem the spy is working for Khrushchev, and sends Volgin on a mole hunt for a KGB spy that, as far as Eva knows, doesn't really exist. But more on this at the end. The bullet that the boss shoots into your leg conceals the fake death pill that you can use to make escaping a little easier. Meanwhile, Ocelot implants a tracker in your back, which Eva will somehow know about and remove for you in a secret and hilarious bonus scene if you don't remove it first.
But how'd you know there was a transmitter lodged there? That's some female intuition you've got.
And if you don't remove the transmitter, the Ocelot unit will be waiting for you in front of the waterfall. This will result in a short change to the following cutscene, where you'll hear and kind of see Eva mowing all the remaining Ocelots down. The boss and Eva also share a glance here, which will be very important for what's to come. Though Eva won't know until later on, Joy has already figured out she's really working undercover not as KGB, but as a Chinese spy. Eva will think that Joy figures this out because both spent time in the Philosopher's Charm schools, but it may have something to do with the fact that Eva is operating off largely false information planted by the bosses and Ocelot's bosses at the CIA, who are synonymous in Snake Eater with the American philosophers. At any rate, notice that just because the boss is working separately with Ocelot and with Eva does not mean that Ocelot and Eva are in this together. Ocelot suspects Tatiana as the spy that he encountered before, and yet again does his juggling routine to decide a so-called traitor's fate. Remember that he called Sokolov a traitor, before doing this little routine the first time. This time, Snake's the one who sees the right gun ahead of time and throws himself in the way to save Eva, losing sight in his right eye as the price. Distracted by his own sudden sadistic arousal, Volgin slinks away, telling Tanya to meet him in his room, and Ocelot reveals this is the moment where he truly becomes the sadist that we'll know and love in later games.
Watching this has made me realize something. It's really not that bad. It's the ultimate form of expression.
Notice the boss seems to give Ocelot the signal of his own signature hand gesture before he disappears. A gesture of secret intimacy, this is similar to the glance that she can't bring herself to give him outside Sokolov's room as Snake behind her is being beaten senseless. It's only now that Snake puts together, Eva and Tanya are the same person, by the way. Eva tells you an escape route, but along the way the alarm is raised and the sewers get cut off. It seems at that moment that Snake's fate is sealed. So how did we end up in this predicament? If everything, as I say, it was going according to plan, then what happened? Well, I think Volgin showing up at that exact time, nobody anticipated.
I come here looking for Tatiana, and what should I find?
It seems that as soon as she figured out Volgin was missing, that the boss headed straight to you using the tracking device. It was then she prevented Volgin from killing you, but she could not prevent him from torturing you. The medley of emotions that are portrayed on the boss's face as she's asked to remove your eye hints that this is not something she was planning on having to do. When Ocelot confronts you in the sewer, it seems he's actually here to give you your only possible shot at survival while maintaining his own cover. The sight of his loaded gun makes Snake leap into the river, but we find out at the end of the game that the bullet he's put in it is actually just a blank. This is all just to cement, perhaps, the story that Snake did all of this on his own. In other words, Ocelot is helping to secure Snake's legend, while hiding that he's a triple agent working both the GRU and the KGB for the CIA.
Don't die on me yet.
If we're talking about MGS3's links to the other games in the series, the one location we have to mention is the fortress Groznyj Grad. There are references to every other Metal Gear up to 3 combined here. When you first arrive, there's no question Groznyj Grad is meant to resemble Shadow Moses. Not only do we have these boxes like the docks, these searchlights in wide open spaces like the heliport, and the freezing cold snowy weather, how Sokolov is kept inside the west wing of the weapons lab is very similar to how Otacon has to be rescued from the nuclear storage building in MGS1. But there are also nods to the MSX era games as well. Groznyj Grad's construction and layout strongly resembles Outer Heaven from the original Metal Gear, yet its location, roughly near Central Asia, is closer to the fortress city setting of 1990's Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, Zanzibar. For years, in fact, fans have speculated whether or not Groznyj Grad actually is Zanzibar. After falling into the river, Snake's encounter with the Sorrow continues Snake's tutelage under the Cobras. The way that the Sorrow forces you to confront everyone you've killed again drives home the central lesson that Snake can only replace the boss by learning that our enemies and friends are relative and that no matter what, they're human like us.
Battle brings death. Death brings sorrow. The living may not hear them. Their voices may fall upon deaf ears. But make no mistake, the dead are not silent. Now you will know the sorrow of those whose lives you have ended.
Now, one small detail with the Sorrow is his tears of blood. The boss makes a veiled allusion to this when she compares the sudden falling rain to blood that the Sorrow's crying. The meaning of this is completely open to interpretation. Another final and less ambiguous Easter egg with the Sorrow happens right after you kill the boss. You can see the Sorrow and the Joy's spirits finally reunited before both phantoms disappear in the wind. The Sorrow tells us that we've been summoned here to see for ourselves the tragedy and misery of both life and death. But one line he says seems to be a veiled premonition that refers to Snake's sons, Solid and Liquid. Now, the river itself is yet another allusion to Japanese culture. Similar to the Greek myth of the river Styx, in Japanese Buddhist folklore, there is the mystic Sansu no Kawa, or River of the Three Crossings. According to the Nichiren Buddhist Library, these three crossings are a bridge, a ford, and a spot where there is only deep, serpent-infested waters. Where one crosses depends on the weight of one's offenses while alive. Only those who've committed great evil must wade through the deep water crawling with hideous snakes. So it's possible this entire sequence is foreshadowing the immense evil of Snake's final objective, killing the saintly Joy. When you come out of this vision, Snake hears the last conversation between the Sorrow and the boss. There's a subtle sequence of shots that seem to imply Snake will live to inherit the Sorrow's sadness, forced to roam the earth practically as the Walking Dead. The continuity between life, death, and suffering in Buddhist thought is also conveyed and cross-pollinated with the Christian notion of baptism, as Snake emerges from the river to discover a meadow teeming with vibrance and life. By the end of the ordeal with the Sorrow, we're given a hint about the crying blood. It seems that the boss shot the Sorrow through the eye, which is why we keep seeing his eyeglasses shattering. After a mystic encounter with the Sorrow in the River of the Dead, and some time with Eva behind the waterfall, Snake returns to Groznyj Grad to do as Sokolov told him. In other words, to blow up the Shagohod by targeting the reserves of liquid rocket fuel stored with it in the hangar. When Snake first arrives at the cave behind the waterfall, it's clear that Eva has used it as a safe house before. The fire was recently lit. There's instant ramen on the ground, and even her radio's there as well. Eva gives you a key to open the door in the hangar to the Shagohod, and then snaps a picture of you on her button-sized spy camera for insurance. Clearly, again, somebody with serious connections to the KGB has been providing Eva with spectacular cover for her alias. While you get to work setting C3s on the liquid fuel tanks in the Shagohod's hangar, Eva rigs explosives on the bridge that you'll use to make your getaway together. But instead of waiting there for you like she's supposed to, Eva instead slinks back on base and enters Volgin's underground vault to try and grab the legacy. Given that today also happens to be the one day Volgin decided to give most of the non-essential personnel time off, it may be that you've both just wandered into a trap. Then again, you may have just got lucky. During the fight with Volgin, the base personnel's EOD squad finds the C3s and manages to mitigate the size of the ensuing explosion, presumably by draining some of the fuel out. The factory's abilities of mass production, however, have been destroyed, even if the original Shagohod still remains. Note also the look yet again that the boss shares with Ocelot. This seems more than any other to suggest at least some of Ocelot's youthful rambunctiousness that we see throughout the game is an act, in this case one designed to stall for time. It's during the fight with Volgin that Ocelot more or less will reveal his true allegiance is only to the boss. Though as we'll see, that won't mean his desire for another brotherly showdown with you is over just yet. One incredibly important line is the boss's to Eva at the end of this scene, "Leave everything to me." It's immediately following this that we can assume that the boss tells Eva everything and makes a deal for Snake's life.
She told me everything. Why did she open her heart to me like that? At the time, I couldn't understand it. But now, I think I do. Snake, she wanted you to know the truth. She chose me to tell you. That's why she saved my life. I've lied to you so many times, but not this time. My orders from the government were to obtain the legacy. and to eliminate everyone who knew the truth about what happened. In other words, I'm supposed to kill you. But I can't do it. Not because we loved each other. And not because you saved my life. But because I made a promise to the boss. And I intend to keep it.
Simply put, Volgin was preparing for an all-out war, and whether against Khrushchev in the east or Johnson in the west, or both, Volgin had the potential to outgun them all. The weapon emplacements in the mountains surrounding the fortress were ready to hold off the region from attacks from the air, while the prototype tanks sitting in Groznyj Grad itself were designed, seemingly, to operate even in nuclear attack zones. It's even possible, in the context of Volgin quoting Remember the Alamo back during Virtuous Mission, that by attacking Sokolov's design bureau, he was trying to provoke the Soviet Union into starting World War III. After all, the Alamo's forces were left to die by a Texas army that went on to defeat the Mexican army in the name of revenge. Eva not only steals the C3, she modifies them in two forms. One, the C3 you use in the hangar, has been equipped with a synchronized detonation timer so that they all go off at once. The other, the C3 that she plants on the rail bridge, detonates upon even a slight direct disturbance, allowing you not only to blow them up by shooting them, but also rendering them undisarmable. Now, it's implied at the end of the game that as a direct result of Operation Snake Eater, China obtains the data that it will need from the Shagohod to conduct its first ever nuclear test, which takes place on October 16, 1964. Ironically, your mission to fight the proliferation of nuclear weapons will accomplish the very opposite, spreading them to create yet another superpower. Meanwhile, a secret plot within the KGB to depose Khrushchev in a bloodless coup and replace him with what will be known as the Troika will be executed on October 12th. Both of these events are direct consequences of Operation Snake Eater. But Eva would have made off with the Philosopher's legacy, or rather, the half of it that Volgin has, if not for Ocelot's little drama that he's been staging for Volgin's benefit for a while now. It isn't until Eva can be caught in the act of espionage that Ocelot and Volgin will grab her, sneaking around the vault underground, caught red-handed in possession of the Philosopher's Legacy. Volgin hands the boss the Legacy's records for safekeeping. This is also very key. This is why I think Ocelot has exposed Eva as a presumably KGB spy. It takes off some of the suspicion from the boss and himself. Despite essentially having been adopted by him, Ocelot has no love for Volgin, and total loyalty to his real boss, the boss, and as an extension, the CIA. In between them, he pretends to be loyal to the GRU and then the KGB. So given all this, here's my theory. I think Ocelot is loyal to the CIA, as I said, because so is his mother, the boss. Ocelot appears to have been planted in Volgin's orbit by the CIA, in preparation for determining the whereabouts of the Legacy and then eliminating him. In the spy world, this kind of long-term operation is known as a sleeper cell. This Ocelot seemingly does to help make a reality his mother's dream, reviving the philosophers. It's totally unclear exactly when Ocelot became a CIA asset, but at the very least it seems clear that the events of Operation Snake Eater were long in the making. It may even go back to when Ocelot was still a boy. He may have been groomed from youth, just like Eva was in one of the Philosopher's charm schools. Using his position as a major within the GRU, I think Ocelot came to the KGB and made a proposal to betray Khrushchev, eliminate the rebellious Volgin, and secure leverage for the new Soviet leadership all in a single blow. All the KGB had to do was nothing. Just do nothing, even as the CIA was infiltrating their country and wound up triggering the destruction of not only one, but by the end, 3 major Soviet design bureaus. By exploiting Soviet infighting, via Ocelot, the CIA plants the seeds for the Soviet Union's gradual collapse. And Khrushchev, meanwhile, never finds out that the boss was on a secret CIA mission. Of the amount that Volgin lists at one point as $100 billion, half is in the possession of the KGB, which is one reason that Ocelot will remain undercover as a Soviet for nearly 30 more years. Groznyj and other Soviet hardliners, like the man most likely to be talking to Ocelot at the end of the game, unofficial KGB head chairman Alexander Shelepin, are happy to cut a deal with the CIA in this matter if it means in the end getting rid of Khrushchev. Though that's the outcome Operation Snake Eater was supposedly done in order to avoid, ironically that's exactly what will happen by the end. Khrushchev wants President LBJ to get the CIA to kill Volgin and the boss while recovering the second Crockett nuke because he's terrified of the Brezhnev faction, which Khrushchev thinks is centered around Volgin and the GRU. In reality, the Brezhnev hardliners are betraying Volgin, and they're just as involved with the KGB, who, by getting into bed with the CIA, will exploit the consequences of Operation Snake Eater to remove Khrushchev themselves. In other words, the anti-Khrushchev, anti-American hardliners that we think Operation Snake Eater is in order to prevent from coming to power are really the ones we're directly helping take over. This, the White House, Langley, and the KGB are all doing together behind Khrushchev's back. The KGB thinks they're gaining leverage over Washington by being made privy to some of the CIA mission's more sensitive details, but in reality, Ocelot has tricked them into allowing for the Soviet Union's own nuclear research to wind up in the hands of their rival, China, allowing undercover American agents to destroy 3 of their biggest research facilities and obtain specs on Granin's bipedal weapon. And worst of all, which the KGB apparently has no clue about, they've been duped into allowing Langley to recover Volgin's stolen half of the philosopher's legacy. Whether the other half of the money was already in KGB custody or wound up there following the mission is unclear. But notice Ocelot says nothing about the philosopher's legacy to the KGB at the end. Only to the CIA does Ocelot bring up the legacy. The intelligence agencies of both mother countries are playing in a cloak and dagger game of subterfuge, betrayal, and espionage. When both OKBs and Groznyj get destroyed by the end of the game, Khrushchev will lose all the credibility he was building the Shagohod to obtain. The anti-Khrushchev faction, meanwhile, will know that seizing power in a bloodless coup won't trigger a major East-West crisis because of the leverage they'll have by knowing that in reality, the boss was the CIA's own agent who they assassinated anyway. One thing Zero tells you about the KGB infiltrator at the start is Fox has arranged for Adam to provide you with an escape route. When Eva produces just such a way out, it seems to confirm she's really a KGB mole inside the GRU. After you beat the end, Eva mentions making a detour en route to that ruin atop the mountain. It seems it was then, after stealing the C3 from Groznyj, that Eva hid the wing-in ground effect vehicle, or WIG, on the lake 30 miles north of Groznyj. The bridge demolition plan, however, fails, but it does damage the Shagohod badly enough that it can then be attacked directly with your own arsenal. After defeating the Shagohod and Volgin's death thanks to a lightning bolt, Snake and Eva crash through Selinoyarsk in a great escape that leaves Eva wounded. Arriving at the stolen GRU WIG just in time, Eva gets preparations underway for exfiltration, leaving you to your final objective, killing the boss. Presumably the huge explosion that occurs right as you reach the Field of Flowers is the boss using the Davy Crockett to nuke Groznyj. The petals that fall around you are poetically resonant with the white snow-like fallout that the boss mentions seeing in the Nevada test back in 1954. And this in turn is also a reference to the particles that rained down for hours after the real-world nuclear test that Snake was exposed to, the Castle Bravo test in the Marshall Islands. The boss's speech at the end of the game is one of the single most important speeches in all of MGS. She explains that her father was, like Volgin's, a member of the Philosophers. The boss relays her entire life story, from growing up to fighting in the war to going to space. She gives us the pieces to work out that she is really Ocelot's mother, though whether or not she knows him as such is completely left unsaid. The point seems to be that even if Joy recognizes Ocelot as her son, he isn't really hers anymore. He hasn't been since the philosophers took him from her, practically the minute he was born, just like they've taken everything from this noble and proud woman. The key lines are when the boss tells us about her revelation that she had journeying among the stars, as well as being forced to take the Sorrow's life. Joy realized during her brief trip to space that the only permanent identity that we on this little celestial body called Earth really have is that we're all human beings. Joy longs for a future where humanity can recognize itself, unshackled by the ideological fetters of either communism or capitalism. It is this dream for the future that in the decades following the events of this game, the last living sons of the boss, like Zero and Snake, will each separately work to make a reality. The boss, in this sense, is the progenitor of what the world will look like after the Cold War, one way or the other. But tragically, she won't live to see it. It is with her story about having to kill the Sorrow that Joy makes clear the true meaning behind the name Snake Eater. Just as she had to kill the Sorrow, now Snake has to kill her. Someday he too will be consumed by his own family. This endless loop is how the philosophers and their heirs will maintain control over history, over the times, even after the Cold War. Just as her father told Joy the truth before they killed him, the boss is now divulging the truth to you. But you won't understand the full story until Eva's debriefing at the end. The boss told her everything for Eva to tell you, and it's an open question whether this was or was not also part of Joy's mission. The emotional fallout from learning the truth will be like Snake's version of original sin. He's tasted the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and now he'll never be the same. This sets into motion Snake's moral and psychological downfall, which will transform him over the years into the dictator and global menace known as Big Boss. Ocelot continues his mad chase after one last showdown, not only in the middle of your escape from Groznyj, but even after you've killed the boss. Now it's a small thing, but notice that unlike the first two times that Ocelot left everything to chance with his revolver, for the last time, it may be more of a performance than anything else. This bullet, after all, is a blank. Did Ocelot learn from his near misses, or was each game of roulette merely a well-crafted illusion, where he knew the outcome in advance? Like everything about this character, who can really say for sure? Now at the end of her speech, the boss takes out a radio and says, "Commence the operation." This appears to be an order for the MiGs that show up once you deal with Ocelot. But MiGs are, of course, Soviet aircraft, and at the last second they're called off, apparently by a direct order from Khrushchev himself. This implicit reveal that the boss is working with the Soviet government is one of the biggest unanswered mysteries of the game. Regardless, what matters is killing her was Snake's final test, which you notice leaves no room for errors or falsehoods. Snake, in other words, really has to kill the boss under 10 minutes or they all die. Now how does Khrushchev get involved and stop the MiGs? Could it be that he finds out the boss dies and so orders the MiGs to disengage? If so, how does Khrushchev find out so fast? And how did the boss establish authority or communication with the Soviet forces to begin with? Well, some things are meant to remain secrets, and that's why we'll keep playing, right? I'm not sure there is a single right answer, in this case or others. Based on what Eva relays at the end of the game though, it does seem that the boss knew all along that Eva wasn't really Tatiana or even the real Eva. It's only once she takes Eva from the hangar that the boss tells her all the things that Eva tells us at the end. That means for the entirety of Operation Snake Eater, the boss has known Eva's actually a Chinese asset, pretending to be a KGB operative undercover in the GRU. In order for everything to work out the way it does, with Snake left alive and in possession of the real philosopher's legacy, Eva had to seem to succeed in her mission as well. It seems that the boss will pass two versions of the philosopher's legacy onto her secret accomplices.
The film we handed the Chinese was a fake. Peking must be in an uproar right about now.
Why do I conclude that the boss gives Eva the fake microfilm? Well, the first time we see it, it's the real legacy, and Volgin gives it to the boss. Then, the boss and Eva go have a secret heart-to-heart. Next, we see the boss give Snake the legacy as she's about to die. In the final sequence, we find two copies. One of Eva's, the other of Snake's. Then at the end, we hear Ocelot say they handed Eva one and that it was a fake. With me? So when Snake takes out the microfilm he seemingly thinks is a fake given the way he tosses it aside, he takes it out of his pocket. His pocket seems to be where he put it after getting it from the boss, because it's still right where he seemingly expects it to be. In this moment, Snake is thinking that Boss and Eva played him by giving him a fake, and Eva the real one, but it's actually the other way around. Snake, not Eva, has the genuine microfilm. I don't think Eva realizes the boss also gave Snake a microfilm at all. When you think about it, this is the only scenario where the boss can preempt Eva even trying to steal the real deal from Snake. Eva doesn't even realize Snake has it because the boss must have handed her the fake herself. Or at least that's my interpretation.
Yes, Groznyj, Grad, and the Grad research facility have both been wiped out without a trace. I understand, sir, but they were necessary sacrifices. Yes, the CIA has taken care of the boss themselves. I believe the White House will be satisfied. Khrushchev is finished. Your time has finally arrived. Yes, the American president is relying on us to keep a lid on the whole affair. We've got him by the balls. It should make a valuable trump card in future negotiations. Yes, Chief Director, of course. I'll keep the KGB informed. Yes, it's me. The boss has accomplished her mission. The philosopher's legacy is now safely with us, in America's hands. With this money, yes, the philosophers can finally be revived. The film we handed the Chinese was a fake. Peking must be in an uproar right about now. I'm afraid so. Only half the money has made it back to the United States. The KGB must still have part of the legacy. Yes, the weapon has been reduced to ashes. That's right. Groznyj Grad has been obliterated by the Davy Crockett we brought in as well. Yes, that was the boss's work too. Speaking of which, I've obtained something from Granin that you might find interesting. It's a revolutionary new nuclear attack system. Perhaps it might just come in handy someday. Yes, we have Snake to thank for that. Khrushchev believed it as well. Yes, they bought our story. I don't think they'll be making a fuss. The secondary alert has been lifted as well. And the Soviets still haven't discovered my true identity. They have no idea that I've been triple-crossing them. I will continue my activities as a contact for the new government. Yes, it appears that no one knew that I was Adam. course. I'm always at the CIA's disposal, Mr. Director.
Let's take a second just to break down things with Eva so it's a little easier to understand. Someone well connected to or inside the KGB is providing her handlers within the Chinese philosophers two things: KGB equipment and classified intel. Now, this KGB insider may not know Eva when he sees her, but he gives her a ton of special equipment to prove she really is a KGB spy within Volgin's ranks. Prove this false information not only to Snake, but anyone else who will happen to discover them, like say Volgin. This equipment includes a shoe transmitter, a kiss of death, and a button camera. On top of this special equipment, this same KGB double agent has provided the Chinese with intel on Snake's secret mission for the CIA.
You're here to rescue Sokolov, right?
As well as a scenario so perfect to aid Eva's infiltration, it almost sounds too good to be true. That scenario is, according to this KGB insider, that there are two other KGB agents who have penetrated Volgin's ranks, and that one of them conveniently has a codename that sounds like a woman's name, Eva. But the KGB source says it's actually Adam who's supposed to meet Snake at the start and give him what he'll need to infiltrate where Sokolov is currently being held, Brannon's lab. This KGB source then provides Eva everything the real Adam should have, including the scientist outfit and the two guns that she'll give Snake.
You had this with you, didn't you?
But he says Eva will have to kill the real Adam at the abandoned factory when she gets there. This KGB officer, for one reason or another, also either fails or neglects to provide Eva with the code phrase, the Lale Lule Lo. Meanwhile, as Snake, it seemed as though this idea of Adam and Eva can be trusted because Zero says that Unit Fox has been corresponding with them. At the end of the game, Ocelot will brag to the American Director of Central Intelligence that nobody figured out he was the real Adam all along. The real Adam who, by the way, knew well enough never to show up that night. Now what's interesting is that Eva tells us that she went undercover as Sokolov's lover first before becoming Eva in order to ascertain the whereabouts of the Philosopher's legacy kept by Volgin.
How long has Tatiana been here?
Only a few weeks.
A few days before the Virtuous mission, then.
But Sokolov, at the very start of the game, you'll remember, was the prisoner of Khrushchev and the KGB. So how did Eva know to pretend to be Sokolov's lover before Sokolov was in the possession of Volgin? Well, again, it would make sense only if the Chinese had intel from inside about Volgin's plans to grab Sokolov and capture the Shagohod. And that person would have to be an insider in the GRU. Who do we know who's an insider in the GRU, the KGB, and the CIA? Only one person, Ocelot. But if Ocelot knew that Sokolov and the Shagohod were going to be captured by Volgin and the GRU, that means he also knew Snake's mission in Virtuous Mission was going to fail. And if he knew Snake's mission was going to fail, it can only mean that he knew the boss was going to defect. If he knew all this in advance, it seems to strongly suggest the CIA knew everything in advance too. If true, this seems to prove my earlier claim that the CIA and Zero sent Snake to Selinoyarsk knowing full well he'd fail. The only question is whether or not they knew that Volgin would actually use the Davy Crockett's. But ultimately, it seems to be irrelevant. The only reason that the boss defected is so that they could get their hands on the Philosopher's legacy, and eventually for Snake to kill her and replace her as the next boss. The specifics of how these events played out were somewhat irrelevant. If true, this would mean that for most of the game, if he doesn't know from the very start, Ocelot is merely trying to figure out if Tanya, the apparent KGB operative, who he identifies as such more or less right away, is the same person as Eva, the Chinese operative he himself helped plant. He might not know from the start, but one way or the other, there's no denying that Ocelot helps Eva, unknowingly or not, blend in as a KGB spy on multiple occasions. So, with all this crazy, convoluted subterfuge in mind, let's try to assemble a theoretical timeline for the events of the game. I hope this will make more sense this way. The Second World War is won by three countries: America, China, and the Soviet Union, the founding members of the Philosophers. This is thanks to the huge sum of money that the three secretly pooled together, known as the Philosophers' Legacy. One byproduct of the legacy is the secret parasite unit, the Cobras, their leader, the Boss, and the mother of all special forces units to come in the 20th century, the SAS. The Boss was created to unite the Philosophers' various militaries, but she was never meant to remain in power for long. After all, the Cobras were never meant to live for very long. We see this not only in their microbombs, but how Joy gets exposed to radiation on multiple occasions, just like Snake will, in a line that would grow in relevance by MGS4, and is also a callback to the ending of MGS1. Naked Snake observes in one radio call that many of his fellow Castle Bravo test subjects have already contracted cancer. As the Boss says, neither of them will be able to live to old age, thanks to the Philosophers.
Yeah, the Bravo shot. It was a hydrogen bomb test conducted at Bikini Atoll on March 1st, 1954. I was at the American base on Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands when the ashes of death started falling from the sky.
Any symptoms?
None. At least, not yet. But a lot of the guys who were in it with me are now suffering from thyroid cancer and leukemia. Some of them are dead already. One of these days. Anyway, I'd better get back to the mission.
Yeah.
As the Cold War rises and splits the Philosophers' world into two, so too are the Cobras split, and the Boss is forced to take part in atomic tests in the Nevada desert. Her time is coming to an end, so the Boss must choose a successor. She chooses Jack, aka Snake, and from the beginning they're only put together to one day reunite the Philosophers as an American organization by pulling apart.
I've been waiting, Snake, for a long time. Waiting for your birth, your growth, and the finality of today.
This is what Joy is really telling Jack at the end of the game. Pushing and pulling former allies into becoming enemies is how the Philosophers turn one war into the next, how they've always intended to operate. This is part of why, in 1959, Joy is abruptly pulled out of Snake's life, only to return for Virtuous Mission as his betrayer. Notice that 1 year after Joy and Snake part ways, the Soviet Union stops providing China with nuclear research, 2 NSA employees defect, and there's also the infamous U-2 incident, which ratchets up tensions between the US and the Soviets. In my reading of MGS3, all these real-world events, from the U-2 downing to the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and even the Kennedy assassination, are all triggered by or related to the American Philosophers, who behind the scenes are under the direction of their would-be successor, Major Zero. Zero does these things to ultimately culminate in the events of Operation Snake Eater, which completely transfers Soviet predominance to America, setting the stage for the end of the Cold War.
He used a mole to get the family out first, and succeeded in sneaking Sokolov over the Berlin Wall shortly afterwards. I was the one who conducted the operation.
One reason Khrushchev had to be ousted was his so-called Khrushchev Thaw, a liberalization of Soviet politics that risked deviating from the paradigm that was most advantageous to Zero and the American Philosophers, the Cold War.
The real
reason that tensions between East and West have settled into a Cold War is because each side fears the other's power. Deterrence. The idea of using threats to keep one's enemy in check is the perfect word to sum up this state of affairs.
This thaw is what created tension between Khrushchev and other factions, and in turn, why Khrushchev looked to Sokolov as the solution to all his problems. This thaw, as well as the mild breakup between Khrushchev and Mao over the subject of nuclear weapons in the late 1950s, were not the actions of the American philosophers, to be sure, but both events did pave the way for the CIA and Zero's eventual plan of attack. Khrushchev really did believe missile development could allow for reducing the size of the Soviet's conventional army, while still placating the more Stalinist members of his country. So when Zero arranges for Sokolov's defection in 1962, it was almost sure to trigger something desperate like the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was only months after the Bay of Pigs, which is when the boss really became the persona non grata within the CIA. She was scapegoated for the incident, and this marked the beginning of her turn into the persona of a villain, despite, as Peace Walker would reveal, not actually being part of the Bay of Pigs at all. The defection of Sokolov must have occurred between the Bay of Pigs, the boss's mission to kill the Tsaro in Selinoyarsk, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. I claim these events did not occur at random or by coincidence. I believe they were leading to the events of Operation Snake Eater by design. Back during World War II, Boris Volgin stole the legacy. It's now roughly 20 years later, in 1964, and his son, Yevgeny Volgin, starts to show signs of having access to tremendous wealth. Word travels through the philosopher's old spy network that he's funding crazy next-generation projects like Granin's Metal Gear with the legacy. And let's speculate the person responsible for obtaining this intel is the spy the American philosophers already have inside Volgin's unit within the GRU, Ocelot. Caught up in all this is Sokolov, who Volgin plans to nab from the KGB. So, because Ocelot secretly also works for the KGB, he finds out about the Shagohod's field test. But he turns around and feeds intel on Volgin's decision to act then to the KGB, who moves Sokolov under heavy guard to the abandoned factory in the Virgin Cliffs. That clears the way for Ocelot's real bosses at the CIA to conduct Virtuous Mission, which is doomed to fail from the start. Ocelot then hears about the boss's undercover fake defection, and how Virtuous Mission is doomed to fail. He's then, again hypothetically, instructed to leak some of these details to the Chinese, ensuring the involvement of someone like Eva several days ahead of the mission. That is why Eva would be at the right place and the right time to be captured alongside Sokolov by Volgin. Next, the CIA would have to begin planning for Operation Snake Eater. Using the true story of two infamous defectors, the CIA weaves a perfect scenario to trick Eva and Snake into working together. Eva's allowed to steal a fake copy of the legacy by the end, so that the real copy can return safely to America. I think Eva puts the KGB tracker in Granin's shoes to draw suspicion onto the existence of a KGB spy, as cover for both her real outfit and objective. There'd be no reason to assume that a KGB spy, after all, is after the philosopher's legacy. However, this inadvertently puts pressure on Ocelot, who, unbeknownst to Eva, is a real KGB spy. Ocelot will use Eva in a similar way to throw suspicion off himself and the boss by the end. The boss recognizes Eva as an agent of the Chinese philosophers nearly right away, and I think Ocelot learns this fairly early too if he doesn't work it out for himself right away. I think he pretends to put this together with evidence that Eva fails to hide, but really this is all just a performative ruse to manipulate Volgin with. When Snake is strung up and tortured, I think Ocelot uses Snake to damage his own eye, to placate Volgin while sparing his mother, the boss, the pain of having to do so herself. I think every single time Ocelot does his luck of the revolver bit, he already knows the outcome, and he's just being sadistic, while also cultivating a false persona. Ocelot tricks Volgin, after all, even by the end, that he's a loyal Russian patriot who's only betrayed Volgin for the boss out of disapproval of Volgin's coarse methods. He He also tricks Eva that he has no idea the spy he's uncovered isn't KGB but Chinese. When he roulettes with Sokolov, he knows the boss will step in. When he roulettes with Snake on the waterfall, he knows Snake will step off. When he roulettes Tatiana in the torture chamber, he knows Snake will intervene. And finally, when he plays roulette with Snake at the end, he knows whichever of them pulls the right trigger, it's just a blank. As soon as Volgin figures out there's a spy, thanks to Grannon's shoe tracker, there's a quiet struggle between the two secret infiltrator wings within his unit, the Americans and the Chinese. This is also part of why, as soon as the boss is requested to prove her loyalty in the torture room, Ocelot brings up Tatiana being the spy. I can't prove Ocelot next led Volgin to lay a trap for Eva in his underground vault, but notice as soon as she is outed as the spy, Volgin puts much more trust back in the boss. And once the legacy falls into the boss's hands, Ocelot no longer has any use for Volgin. So he turns on him right when Volgin needs him most. The irony is that Volgin's right about the boss's motives, but dead wrong about her loyalties. Volgin has no idea his own destruction is precisely what the boss will use to make the world one, purely by virtue of Snake's mission. Notice Snake is never told by Zero or anyone else explicitly to recover the legacy. The boss just hands it over. This also means that Snake could not have faced her before she obtained it to give to Snake as she dies. And the way that the situation is set up, it makes Snake feel as delivering the Philosopher's legacy back to the CIA is a fulfillment of the boss's will, not a CIA mission. But past a certain point, it just becomes speculation on my part. In these videos, I try to only forward a theory or unofficial explanation to the point that it's borne out by the available evidence. That's how real intelligence works, and that's how I try to work too. As Zero himself says,
there are no guarantees in espionage, Snake, only calculated guesses.
Espionage isn't about facts per se, but making educated guesses. Personally, I believe Joy telling you the so-called truth via Eva was also part of her mission. I think she leaves out or alters certain details, for two reasons. Plausible deniability, considering everything that she's saying is going to be routed through Eva, as well as the reason of Joy's mission, which ultimately involves emotionally manipulating Snake. The big example of something that may be left out has to do with Volgin and the Davy Crockett. The boss says that nobody could have anticipated that Volgin would use it to nuke Sokolov's research facility, and that this decision is what ultimately sets into motion the necessity for Snake having to kill her. Whether or not Volgin's snap decision to nuke Sokolov's facility was anticipated, if the idea to use Snake to kill and replace the boss was not yet formulated beforehand, why then involve Snake in the virtuous mission at all? Why have the boss so blatantly and personally betray him? I'll tell you why. Because without this betrayal, Snake would not be dependable as the hitman. Without this story of his betrayal by the boss only for him to then defeat and surpass her, Snake would have never been able to become the legend of Big Boss. And that's what he's been groomed to become ever since the day the two first met. It's safe to assume at least the possibility that if the CIA or the American philosophers did not expect Volgin to use the nuke and transform the boss into a pariah in need of slaying to halt global nuclear annihilation and/or a huge scandal, a so-called October surprise right on the eve of the 1964 presidential election, they'd have no need to involve Snake at all. The boss could have simply snatched Sokolov herself, as Ocelot seems to expect to find her doing when we first meet him. Instead, though, she involves you. And notice, even before she defects, the boss is saying stuff that already sounds like what she'll say at your final showdown. The boss may not have foreseen exactly how, but she has known that you would be the one to take her life ever since she started shaping you into the solid Snake that you are by the end. She tells us this in so many words herself. Is Ocelot genuinely shocked when Volgin decides to use the nuke? Maybe. It would certainly be consistent with what the boss tells us at the end. But I think Ocelot is merely playing a role to protect his own identity and covertly to fulfill his part of the mission to turn you into Big Boss. After all, we know how he truly feels about his fellow Russians. It's possible that Ocelot doesn't know Volgin will use the Crocket, and that the boss wouldn't capture Sokolov herself, sure. It's also possible that he doesn't immediately recognize Eva as the Chinese spy. But this ambiguity, after all, is the hallmark of clandestine operations. They're supposed to remain a secret, plausibly deniable. All I'll say further here is Ocelot uses his apparent shock and outrage at Volgin's nuke to blend in as a naive and patriotic GRU colonel, and he brings it up at a particularly key moment, right as Volgin starts talking about a spy in their midst. Snake is supposed to learn from the boss's example and become just as selflessly devoted to the missions he's given. But instead, he'll become grief-stricken, bitter, and disillusioned, and soon he'll turn his back on the boss's legacy and the country she so unswervingly served. And that is truly something that nobody seems to have anticipated. Snake Eater is, for many people, their favorite MGS. It's not just a great stealth game and a classic, winding, and ambiguous spy story, as the weird love child of John le Carre and Tokukatsu shows. It has a ton of heart, humor, wit, and style. Snake Eater was truly one of the greats, and we may never see a game quite of its like again. Well, that does it for Snake Eater. Join me next time as we dive into the second game chronologically, Peace Walker. Until next time, boss.
What a thrill, with darkness and silence through the night. What a thrill, I'm searching and I'll melt into you. What a fear in my heart, but you're so supreme.